I hope you guys are doing good. This is an African Russian. Today we're going to be going through another analysis of the backbone and Solidar front update. Let's go.
Video has been brought to you by you, the viewer. Thank you all for watching and enjoy this video. Hello and welcome to another update. In this one we'll be covering the Solidar front as well as the north of Bakhmut. And then we'll be analyzing the situation, what will happen once the front has been broken through, as the Russian forces are currently fighting within the very edge of the Ukrainian defensive line north of Bakhmut. Starting out with the update, so the most recent report by Ryber, and I'm going to start taking their reports with a grain of salt because this is too much retraction compared to the usual, so I'll start taking it with a grain of salt whenever I do a Ryber update. But with this one, they now claim that Krasnohora isn't completely under control, but that they have attacked from the western side and the eastern side, so it's essentially encircled, as Ukrainian forces have no way of retreating. Therefore, they claim that it has been encircled and that they are entering the city and storming the city. Thereby, it was under control, but it's not under control, they're still fighting there. Other than that, the fighting is continuing around Peraskovivka, as well as Blahodatne, and fighting at Blahodatne then turns out to be on the eastern side of the river. So again, I'm going to start taking it with a grain of salt. As for the Solidar front itself, it seems that there is also still fighting within the area, as they have completely encircled the Ukrainian forces within the city center. However, they haven't cleared it out yet. They claim that about 100 soldiers have surrendered and given up. However, they claimed that there were originally over 500 soldiers, so only 1/5 of the soldiers have surrendered, while the rest are still fighting some kind of guerrilla war with the Russian forces within the city. And then they continue fighting to the west and north of Solidar, as in the northern area they haven't reached the village of Silj. However, they are attacking in the direction of it, and in the southwestern area of Solidar they have now captured the residential area to the west of Solidar. This is coupled with drone footage. As we can see here, there are some Wagner PMC soldiers going around in between these houses, and it was then geolocated to be this area right here. So the residential areas to the west of Solidar has been taken by the Wagner PMC as they are moving through this area. And now the main fighting is around this final salt mine and railway station by the highway west of Solidar. So essentially the Russian forces have indeed captured most of this area. However, they need to clear out the remaining Ukrainian soldiers before they can actually call it captured. Alright, now moving on to the analysis. We can look at the positions that I've drawn up, and that is, first of all, the most important point is that this part of the defensive line has been cut off, as the Russian forces have entered Peraskovivka from the west. We can see that they've then cut off the defensive line from the west, and at the same time from the north, where the Russian forces are attacking the village of Silj. This means they've cut it off from the north as well. With this, there are three alternatives or three next steps for the Ukrainian forces. The first one is if they want to hold Siversk, the next defensive line will be something similar to this, where they go from Mykolaiivka to the west and by this river here, and then finally up over and behind the canal, where they will have to hold a defensive line by the canal, and then down to Venivske, and they'll be holding the area around Bakhmut as well. With this, they will be able to hold the defensive positions by Bakhmut, but most likely will be vulnerable from the north, and the Russian forces would then break through this northern area and go to and outflank Bakhmut and attack it from the northwest. And the reason I say that is because if we look at the topographic map, here we have Solidar and here we have Bakhmut, and this is the Krasnohora area. And from this we can see that there are three main heights. This one by the highway to the northwest of Bakhmut, this one south of that, which is also to the northwest of Bakhmut, and then we have the one to the west of Bakhmut. And essentially we have this one long high ground which goes around Jesov Yar to the south and to the north by the canal. This is why I say that they most likely have to make a defensive line behind the canal, as they will have the canal between them and the Russian forces, and they will also have the high ground. On top of that, this whole area is open fields. Although there are valleys to the north and to the south, it is all open fields. So it's easy to traverse through, and it's also easy pickings for artillery. This means that a defensive position by the highlands to the west by the canal is the most optimal defensive line, and it is by far the best option for Ukraine, which is why I've called this line here the optimal defense line for Ukraine, as we can see going from the north around Liman area by the Severodonetsk River, down to the south and following the canal all the way to the southern area where they run out of control. With this, they will have a defensive line in the highlands and behind a canal. If they want to hold Siversk, then they will not go to the northern area, they will just have this area to the west. But Bakhmut is essentially lost, as there's no defensive line for the Ukrainians to the northwestern area of Bakhmut, which means that the Bakhmut can be outflanked and it can be cut off and completely encircled by the Russian forces, as there's no Ukrainian position that can be established to the north of Bakhmut, other than being way too far to the west, which allows them to just avoid those defenses completely. So essentially we can say with the fall of Soledar, Bakhmut is in an extremely vulnerable position, and it's only a matter of time until Bakhmut is lost. As for after these defensive lines, if the Russian forces manage to break through these two lines as well, if the Russians manage to break through this line as well, then the only other choice they have is the Sloviansk-Konstantinivka line, which goes all the way to Toretsk. So they'll have this one long bulge for the Russian forces if they manage to capture Soledar, capture Bakhmut, and break through the Ukrainian defenses. Then they will eventually go and take Siversk, and they will have this whole pocket here. This isn't good for the Russians, because if this happens and they manage to capture Siversk and Bakhmut as well, then they will be in a position where they would be in a bulge. And when they're in a bulge, the Ukrainian forces can attack the Russian forces from 3 directions, while the Russian forces can only respond in 1 direction at a time. So there will be a concentrated force here, while the Ukrainians can just attack from 3 directions. From the north, from the west, and from the south. While the Russian forces will have to focus their forces all here. So 1 artillery from each side will attack all 3 sides, while the Russian sides will have to attack each side individually. So Russia would need 3 times as much artillery to have as much effect as the Ukrainian artillery. Which means that any Russian attempt to take control over this whole southern area between Siversk, Soledar, and Bakhmut would be coupled with a Russian offensive in the northern area in the Luhansk front, where they will try to capture the Toretsk and Liman areas, which will allow them to attack the Ukrainians and reach the Oskil River. And with that, they will have the northern flank secured, and then they will be able to focus on the Sloviansk-Toretsk line, as the Russian forces will be able to match the Ukrainian positions and be able to fight properly against them. And as for the Bakhmut area, if Bakhmut falls, the next main position would be Chesev Yar. The Ukrainian forces already have all of their artillery positioned in this city, as it is stationed on the highest peak in this whole front line. And that's going to be all for this update and analysis. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.
Yeah, so I think you did the better work, and that's all I can say. You have a blessed day, and thank you for being on my channel.